and say thank you. Thank you everyone so much for joining us today. Again, for another great series of our Native Fish Society Lunch and Learns. Today we will be going over the Coastal Multi-Species Management Plan for the Oregon coast. Everything from pretty much the Sixes River north to the Nehalem, the Canicum in that area. So with us today, we have, before I introduce our guest speaker and Northern Oregon Native Fish Society coordinator, I just want to go through some background stuff on Zoom. For all of you that are on the call today, please make sure if you are not speaking, you're on mute. We're going to have about 20 minutes of presentation, and then we'll follow that with about 20 minutes to 25 minutes of question and answer. Feel free as things go to type questions into the chat box if you would like. We'll go ahead and record those and ask them at the end of the presentation. But we're going to go ahead and go through that. This video is being recorded for further reference. We'll post it on the NFS website as well as the NFS YouTube channel, so you can reference it further on down the line as well. So with that, I think I covered pretty much all our bases here, and I want to introduce Liz Perkin. She is our Northern Oregon coordinator for Native Fish Society, and she will be kicking us off here today for our presentation.
All right. Thanks so much, Kirk. This is kind of a different sort of lunch and learn today, because usually we try to feature our river stewards and other people who volunteer with Native Fish, but today it's actually a Native Fish staff joint effort. And so I'm going to be presenting a little bit. Kirk is going to be actually presenting a fair amount, and Jennifer is going to finish us off telling a little bit about what you can do to testify, how to testify. So with that, I'm going to actually start sharing my screen and share this presentation that we've prepared. So as Kirk mentioned, we're going to be talking about the Coastal Multi-Species Monitoring Plan. And sorry, actually, this worked a little bit differently when I was testing it out. I need to get my other monitor going so I can see the full presentation here. Sorry about that. I might need to actually end and restart. Apologies. So I think now that maybe I can get this going. Sorry about this. Okay. Just gonna reshare my screen. That's the wrong one. Sorry, everyone. I promise this worked really well when I practiced it earlier. It was really smooth before.
If any consolation, this is exactly what's happened in like the last 5 Zoom meetings I've been in with other people presenting. So it's not just you, Liz.
It doesn't want to share the right screen. I'm really sorry about this, guys. Why is this happening? Oh my goodness. Sorry, I'm gonna get rid of one of these PowerPoint options. So hopefully it will only recognize the correct one. Are you seeing the presentation?
You can see the presentation in your normal PowerPoint view, not in the presenter view.
Okay, but you're seeing the presentation.
Yes.
Okay. Because right now it looks to me like you're looking at my other screen.
We're seeing, it says, you know, what is the CMP? You got a nice photo from Russ. Now we see it in presentation mode.
Okay. Sorry about that, guys. All right. So just for those of you who aren't familiar with the CMP, its purpose is to be used by anglers, conservation groups, watershed councils, government agencies, landowners, and the general public. And partially it's just to understand how steelhead, salmon, and trout in the coastal area are managed. It also really specifies what the long-term management goals are and what actions need to be taken to achieve those goals. So the purpose of the CMP is to, quote, ensure the continued viability and conservation of the Chinook salmon, chum salmon, steelhead trout, and cutthroat trout species management units along the Oregon coast from the Elk River, Cape Blanco, to the Nicanicum River and Seaside, and to achieve a desired status that provides substantial ecological and societal benefits. And so we really focus on kind of that last part of that we really want to be pushing towards a desired status that provides substantial ecological and societal benefits, and not just hanging out there above some, minimum level. We want these to be healthy populations. And I'm sure most of you on this call want that as well. And so part of why we're talking about this is, first of all, as you probably know from our message sharing, that the ODFW Commission is going to be discussing the CMP and what needs to happen around it at next week's commission meeting. And so part of what we're concerned about is that some of the key objectives that were identified in the CMP aren't currently being met. And there's some changes that need to be made. There's this 12-year review that's scheduled to take place in 2026. And we'd like to see some changes happen before then. It'd likely be 2028 before any changes would actually go into effect to address some of the failings. And then also the climate change scenarios and impacts weren't really incorporated into the original CMP. That was actually something that was brought up by an independent science review panel as well as a criticism. And so we would like more of that incorporated into the CMP. I think after the summer that we've all had, all of us probably want to see that. So actually to talk more about some of the specific issues that we have. So some of these things might be something that you would want to incorporate in your testimony if you do decide to testify at next week's ODFW commission meeting. Kirk is actually going to go through these and talk about some of the specific problems with the CMP. So Kirk, if you want to go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Liz. Can everyone hear me? Good. Awesome. So I wanted to start off by just sharing the monitoring that's currently happening. And I'm going to focus right now on steelhead in general, winter steelhead, a little bit on summer steelhead. And then I'm going to follow it up with Chinook, which has a whole different type of monitoring. They do some carcass surveys and stuff like that. But to start off, I'm going to talk about the monitoring of winter steelhead here. Here on the slide, you can see a picture of the CMP measurement area, or SMU. And so within this area, they have a couple different options for monitoring. They do 160 different red surveys in this area. And they're on 14-day rotations, and they use this model called GRITS. It's a statistically proven model that is random surveys. So it's surveys that focus not on specific prime winter steelhead spawning beds, but rather on random sites within each watershed that possibly could have spawning fish. The reason for this is if they only go to ideal spawning beds, the likelihood that there's going to be a pair of fish there and multiple spawning beds there is very likely until the population is totally falling off a cliff. So they incorporated this new randomized survey system through coho salmon when they were listed, and they've also incorporated it here into this this measurement area. There is a subsample of the subpopulation of the salmonberry that does use index red surveys, and they survey very intensively. And you can see that located in the yellow on the graph or on the map there. And then lastly, they used fixed site counts, and that is the North Umpqua watershed. So everything that crosses Winchester Dam is measured, is counted. They don't count 100% of the video. They do take an extrapolated version of it, and then, you know, like I said, extrapolate that for total numbers. The reason for this is it takes a ton of staff time to watch all that video. I have seen the statistical analysis that goes into extrapolating those numbers, and it is fairly good. Yeah, we would like to see 100% viewing, but they do some good statistical analysis. Native Fish Society has partnered with some small nonprofits in order to help organize 100% counts, but that is very difficult to do. So right now, they're just using, since about 2015, they've only utilized those extrapolated counts at Winchester Dam. They do snorkel surveys throughout the entire measurement area. So survey 160 different sites looking for juveniles. And the CMP area is divided into 5 different sections. So they have the North Coast, which you can see all the way up top there on this map, which includes the Nicanicum, the Nehalem, the Tillamook, and the Nestucca populations. They have the Mid Coast, which is in the middle there, and that includes the salmon, Solettes, Yaquina, Alsea, Yahats, and Siusla populations. And then they have the Mid-South Coast, 10 Mile, Coos, Coquille, Floras, Sixes populations. And then lastly, they have the Umpqua, which they do spawning surveys for the South Umpqua, main stem Umpqua, and then they have fixed counts for Winchester Dam. So if you can go to the next slide, Liz.
Sorry.
Okay.
Acting up.
So I wanted to discuss before I jumped into like the problems and what we're seeing is what critical abundance is. And critical abundance is the level identifies the point at which conservation of the population could be in jeopardy if the downward trend continues. This was identified in the CMP as well as other management plans. If this level is reached, harvest of populations will be curtailed, taking over precedence of the sliding scale, which they put in order. There's a few watersheds in this measurement area that do have wild harvest. They do put a caveat in there that given the uncertainty associated with population abundances, forecasting results, a weight of evidence approach will be used to determine if populations in question actually experience a serious decline in abundance. So even though populations reach critical abundance, it's up to the biologists to make those decisions and move those forward. And then lastly, one thing that I point out in regards to critical abundance is that if 2 successive years are observed of critical abundance, ODFW shall initiate an evaluation of additional actions that are warranted to protect the stratum from long-term decline. So these are policy writings that are found in the CMP. Another thing that the CMP really highlights is that monitoring information will be reported annually. And if there's signs or signals that there's a downward trajectory that's not going towards desired status, management action will be taken. So it doesn't really have to reach critical abundance. They just want to know, like, if things are going down, it states that management action will be taken in order to reverse the effects. Next slide. So I wanted to get into some of the data. There was a 5-year review of the CMP last year that was published in September. This is a graph from it. It highlights the North Coast stratum, so the Nicanicum, Nestucca, Tillamook, that area. As you can see here, it reached critical abundance in 2018 and 2019, and you can see the trend line there in black. So both these populations, all as a total, reach critical abundance. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, Liz. And this is another example of that put into a bar graph. The one thing that I want to keep in mind for folks, the reason they lump all these populations together, all these rivers, rather than doing individual measurements, is the fact that they don't have enough data in order to be statistically valid for each individual watershed. So they had to lump them all together. They don't have enough survey effort and they don't have enough data. Again, you know, they're limited resources and that sort of thing. So you got to give them benefit of the doubt there. But again, you got to think that that's not the best way we can manage these watersheds. Again, one thing I wanted to point out is the pre-CMP average there in the top right-hand corner was 29,139 fish, the 10-year average. And the 6-year average of the post-CMP average would be 24,827 fish. So we've actually seen, you know, 5,000 fish average decline since the adoption of this management plan. Another thing I would point out is that in 2020, we did see a good year of returns. And this was coast-wide, so it was kind of an anomaly somewhat if you look at that trend line, but that did happen. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide, Liz. The next one I would point out is they didn't reach the 2 years of successive critical abundance in the mid-south coast. That's the 10-mile Coos, Coquille, and Flores. But if you look at 2017 and 2019, they both reached critical abundance. Again, look at those pre-CMP numbers, post-CMP numbers. This one in specifically had about a 9,000 fish decrease. And that's only using a pre-CMP 10-year average. That's not using historical, say like 50-year average. Got to think that shifting baselines might be playing into factor here. Go ahead and go to the next slide. I wanted to talk a little bit about the North Umpqua summer steelhead. Basically here, we are seeing you can see the trend line, a decline in population in recent years. However, we haven't reached critical abundance. Critical abundance is set at 1,200 fish, but historically we saw much higher numbers. So we're flagging this one specifically with the effects of climate change. As many of you may already know, this year has been a catastrophic year, the lowest returns on years. And we have seen some adaptive management take place within the North Umpqua watershed. Specifically, like right now it's shut down. In previous years, we have seen bubble closures on the main stem protecting the refugia for cold water for summer steelhead migrating into the North Umpqua and that sort of thing. But again, Liz will get into this a little bit later, but we're looking for a little bit more action and things before closing the rivers and before we get to those catastrophic levels. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. I also wanted to hit on fall Chinook. So these graphs here are also published in the 5-year review. As you can see, it shows the blue shows above desired status, the red shows below critical abundance, and the gray shows in between those two levels. 8 of the 14 populations identified in the CMP reached critical abundance last year, with 4 of them, or in the last 6 years, with 4 of them reaching it twice. So the Tillamook, the Siuslaw, the Coquille, and the Alsea all hit critical abundance 4 out of the last 6 years, or 2 out of the last 6 years. Sorry, apologize for that. The blue where they did reach above desired status was in 2014 and 2015. There was a better year for those fish. For fall Chinook, they saw better runs. And so as you can see, all the populations in those years reached those levels. But since then, we've seen critical abundance and we haven't seen much action. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Another thing I wanted to cover on real quick was just the percent hatchery origin spawners. This is the number of hatchery fish that are spawning in the wild with wild fish. As you can see here, we have upwards of 16% spawning, hatchery fish spawning in the wild. Identified in the native fish conservation policy interim criteria before conservation management plans were made, they wanted no more than 10%. And right now we have 16% for a 9-year average on the mid coast. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Liz. I like to highlight the North Umpqua here because it's a fixed count. And with the North Umpqua, we're seeing upwards of 30%. So they know exactly how many fish are coming back to this watershed and exactly how many hatchery fish and how many wild fish. And if they're having 30% in the North Umpqua, where they're actually observing fish, the likelihood within a lot of the other areas within the CMP is they're seeing other results like that. At least that's my personal thinking. The other data that we just saw with the 16% PHOS was based off of red counts and observing actual hatchery fish on the spawning ground, which is very difficult with steelhead. You don't see a lot of fish on the actual spawning bed when you're out there observing and doing red counts. Let's go to the next slide. The other one that I wanted to highlight is the number of hatchery fish on the spawning bed for spring Chinook. And as you can see here, it's at 54% of those fish on the spawning bed in the North Umpqua Basin are hatchery fish. Huge problems for integration, so genetic integration of fish, as well as competition for a spawning bed and where they're spawning. Next slide. Yeah, so when they created the CMP, climate and ocean change was not accounted for. Since then, in June of 2020, ODFW Commission passed the climate and ocean change policy. And in that, it gives good guidelines. But what really needs to be included is some management triggers and actions. So when we reach those triggers that help provide for climate and ocean change. And so Liz is going to talk a little bit about that here in just a second. But climate and ocean change policy, or climate and ocean change in general, was not included at all with the creation of the CMP back when they created it in 2014 and adopted it. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So adaptive management was not specified either. So what would happen if we reach those critical levels? How was the department, or how would folks like us give back? How would we and be involved with the conservation of these species if these critical levels were triggered and action needed to be taken? Adaptive management was not indicated within the plan. It was kind of left up in the air to the biologist. So that's something that we're asking be included within the plan. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Liz, I believe, to talk about what we're asking for looking forward.
Yeah, so along with that adaptive management, there's kind of the large framework of adaptive management we'd like to see happen, where it goes to bring in stakeholders, it goes to the commission, that these things are put in place. But we would there's some very specific things that we're asking to be included as options that can be taken, as actions that can be taken as part of that adaptive management. So for the hatchery aspect, so what we really want to is proper monitoring and reporting of PHOS. So as you probably noticed in some of those slides that Kirk was showing, and as Kirk mentioned too, that for most of these populations, it's just however many spawners they can actually see in the ground, on the ground. And that's not actually a really great way to get a good estimate of what the PHOS is. As Kirk mentioned, there's so few fish that you actually see on the reds when you're out counting, especially if the river is running high and there are fairly high flows. And also in that reporting, so they use a 9-year running average to say like, oh, that accounts for, some years you might get a really big hatchery return and it's hard to control them. In that way, that's kind of averaged out. But, our take on that is that if you get a year where there's 60% hatchery spawners, that's still having a really huge effect, potentially huge effect on genetic integration with those wild fish. And that should still be reported. So if you look through that 5-year update, of monitoring update, you'll often see that their whole tables of PHOS is just like, to be determined, because they're waiting for the 9-year average. They don't even report the annual counts that are coming in. So we need also reporting of that percent hatchery origin spawners. We need to be aware of what's going on there. We'd also like to potentially have, an option of removing bag limits on hatchery fish. And so that's a way to, help control if it does seem like there's a huge number of hatchery fish coming in that year. We'd also like to end collecting wild fish for the brood stock. And I know there's a lot of differing opinions on this, and people think, oh, this is a really good way to keep the connection between the wild fish and the brood stock, the hatchery fish. But what we've found out from scientific research is that even after one generation of being in a hatchery, you already start to see genetic adaptation and decline in fitness from fish that are used in hatchery programs, produced from hatchery programs. So we don't want just like, this kind of swirling the drain by using valuable wild fish genetics to contribute to brood stocks that they're ultimately potentially damaging to the wild fish. We'd also like to see the use of traps to collect brood stock. So right now, they're completely reliant on, in most of these coastal systems, one of the benefits of these coastal systems is most of them are not dammed. There's no control on the hatchery fish actually entering these systems. And so they completely rely on anglers to control the percent hatchery origin spawners. And we feel that there needs to be some more control on that brood stock. And so we're not just hoping that the anglers are going to help keep those numbers down. And we'd also like to potentially see decreased smolt releases depending on what that PHOS is looking like in a basin, right? So if the PHOS is really out of control, if it's above that target level, then it looks like they need to be a little bit more proactive about things and just decrease their smolt releases in response to that. One of the concerns that was brought up by the Independent Science Review Board was that there's potentially high competition between hatchery and wild fish in the ocean. And that isn't accounted for or taken into consideration at all in the CMP. And so we'd like that to kind of be included in the thinking about this as well. So there's also some some different angling management options that we'd like to see considered. And so these would really be dependent partially on what the stocks are looking like during the year. And, maybe it's something that if a stock is looking poorer than is expected, that then maybe, the season gets closed early. But really, we would like to see things that are a little bit more proactive before things need to be closed. So things like, adopting gear regulations. So limiting, so no bait and using only barbless hooks. Potentially closing down like things that we've seen in the Olympic Peninsula that have some management changes that have happened there. So no fishing from floating devices, or maybe, you can fish from a floating device, but you can't use a motor. So you can't keep kind of hammering the same run over and over. You just get one chance at it. And also, of course, so one of the things that kind of ties in with climate change as well is really establishing some low flow and high temperature regulations and closures. And having those in place so that anglers are aware of them ahead of time. And it's not just up to the district bio, and there's not this pressure on the district bio to come up with those on the fly, but that they're on the books. And it's just like, okay, if the flows get below a certain level, or if the temperature gets above a certain level, then these regulations are going to come into play. Potentially also, if the runs are doing really poorly, then closing smaller tributaries. And we'd also like to see mandatory reporting of catch and release effort. That's something that hasn't been taken into account yet, but we all know that if you catch a fish, 2 or 3 times, that even if you're doing a good job, every once in a while, there's going to be, mortality in there, and you're just decreasing the fitness of the fish. And so if we have some mandatory reporting of the catch and release efforts, we have a better sense of what the impact of that catch and release fishery is as well. So we want to also give credit where credit is due here. So, Kirk mentioned that ODFW has taken some different actions in the North Umpqua, particularly recently. They've done some things to protect the steelhead there. They've also put some Chinook harvest and bag limits in place in response to these poor returns that we've seen. So, full credit to them for doing a good job there. But again, we'd like to see some more proactive things happening so that we're not just trying to keep these populations above this critical level. We want to see, what actions are being taken to really get to those desired levels. That's what we want. We want fisheries that are healthy. We want populations that are healthy. So also kind of looking forward and what you can do to take some action. So we want people to encourage people to get involved with your watershed, maybe join your watershed council. Of course, you can always join us as a river steward too, maybe volunteer with habitat restoration, familiarize yourself with some of the limiting factors in the watersheds that you like to fish the most. Those are going to vary from watershed to watershed a little bit, but in general, things like habitat destruction, so logging, issues around agriculture are going to be limiting factors in most of the coastal rivers. And so just get more involved with that so you know what those limiting factors are, and you can really maybe start to make a difference there too. Also, we'd encourage you to volunteer with ODFW to help with those spawning surveys, and also get to know your ODFW district bio, develop a relationship with them, and start to have conversations with them, and let them know that you kind of have their back, and you're supportive of them taking management actions and being proactive for these fish. And of course, so one of the things we're encouraging you to do here is to testify. Take a stand for the fish you love. At this ODFW commissioners meeting next week, take 3 minutes and let the commissioners know how you feel about this, and that you want these fish to be protected. And actually to give you some more information about how to testify and do a good job with it and be effective with it. Jennifer is now going to give a short little summary of some tips about how to effectively testify. So here's also just some links. We'll link to these in the chat here later in the talk, but then we'll let Jennifer go ahead and talk about how to prepare and deliver effective testimony.
Yeah, so I'm going to run through this real quick because I want to make sure we leave time for folks if they have questions about what's been presented today. But I'm going to give you what I call the meat and potatoes of how to testify before a decision-making body, be it a commission like ODFW or a legislative committee. So go ahead and advance. Next slide. So the kind of meat, what are you going to say when you get up to that microphone, though these days it is usually over the computer? There's a way that I tend to advise people to break down putting together their testimony. In the beginning, there are two things that are critical and necessary to do. You want to first formally address the decision-making body that you're speaking to. So in the case of ODFW, you would first say Chair Wall and members of the commission. If you have any questions about how to do that formal salutation, feel free to reach out to us anytime and we can help you figure it out for whoever you're testifying in front of. You're also going to want to introduce yourself. This is actually a required part of testifying, is to put your full name into the public record. So do make sure to state your full name. And then if you do have a particular association with the issue that you're testifying about, be it as a river steward, a staff member of a conservation organization, or a professional in a particular field that's applicable to the testimony, state it there. The other thing that I want to remind folks of that's really important as you go through your testimony is wherever you can, make it personal. So, in the beginning, I think it's also a great opportunity to to tell them, the decision makers, why this matters to you, to your family, to your community. But also, if you can intersperse it elsewhere, that's great as well. The thing to remember is that as humans, we don't relate to one another because we hear statistics or jargon words. We relate to one another through emotion and a connection to shared experience. So then the real meat of your testimony kind of comes in three parts around, what is the issue that you're here to talk about today. So you really want to state the problem that you've come to talk about. And this is where, you can, in all of these, kind of include some stats or facts, but again, keep it personal, keep the jargon to a minimum. So after you state what your problem is, you can then go into, what is the thing that is causing this problem? So kind of think of this as walking through these steps of, problem, reason for the problem, and then you eventually want to get to how can this decision-making body in particular fix that problem. And in this part of your testimony, I really advise you to also express what the vision is that will be realized if this decision-making body is going to fix this problem. So is it that by doing what you're asking, this commission or decision-making body will restore abundant fish to your river, or provide for more fishing opportunity for you and your family, or support a more well-functioning ecosystem? So make sure to give that like overarching vision that people can move towards. And then at the end of your testimony, a common way to just indicate that you have completed your testimony is a simple thank you at the end. So that's, what I call the meat, but go ahead, we'll go on to the potatoes, Liz. So, just a few quick pointers. Practice. If you have the opportunity to write out your testimony, practice delivering it out loud and with someone that you trust to just kind of get a feel for what it sounds like. It also helps you hear what your sentence structure sounds like. We actually write in a slightly different style than we speak in. And so this is, by practicing, you can really find those places where it's like, oh, that doesn't sound quite right to my ear out loud, and fix those. You can also identify tricky words. I was once testifying recently, and I practiced and practiced, and I had the word specificity in my testimony. And it's just a really hard word for my mouth to say. And I got to it. And even though I managed to practice it all right, once I was testifying, I of course stumbled over it. So just, be aware of like where you're having a hard time in your practice, and just cut those words out or change them to something else. And the other thing is to practice talking slowly, because once you get that adrenaline going, you are definitely going to start talking faster than normal. And then a couple other tips: you can keep it really simple. If there are multiple people testifying about the same subject, you can simply get up there and address the decision-making body, state your name for the record, and then say that you agree with what has already been said. Decision makers appreciate that, and it still has an impact of showing that there's a groundswell that has come out to express their opinion on something. Written testimony also works too. It's harder to gauge whether or not it's as effective, because you can't guarantee that the decision makers have actually read your written testimony. But it is a way of adding your voice to the public record. And again, if we have a lot of people speaking out about an issue, that helps bring attention and awareness to that issue. So next slide, Liz. The last kind of things to be aware of. Most testimony you will need to register in advance for. So for the ODFW commission, you have to register no later than 8 a.m. on the Wednesday before a commission meeting, and those are on Fridays. So the upcoming commission meeting, which will be not this Friday, but the following Friday, you will have until next Wednesday to register. Know the time limit that you are allowed to testify under. Almost every public comment will have a time limit. The ODFW commission generally limits things to 3 minutes. If there's a very full agenda, it is possible for them to say that they want to limit testimony to a shorter amount of time. So like I said, it's good to keep your testimony brief to begin with, but be aware of that time limit and practice within that time limit so you don't have to worry about the clock running out on you. Also, now that we're all using our computers to testify and join meetings instead of being in person, it's more convenient. You don't have to drive to Salem every time you want to make your voice heard on an issue, but you also do need to make sure that your technology is working for you. So most testimony that we've been involved in utilizes either Zoom or Microsoft Teams. So just make sure that you're comfortable with whatever platform the decision-making body is using that day. And also, I encourage you to log in early. A lot of times these meetings don't have agendas with times filled in. They just roll from one item to the next as they move through them. And you certainly don't want to miss your opportunity to say what you have been practicing for, the last week and working on. And then finally, You don't have to do it alone. Feel free at any time, if you are working on something related to what Native Fish Society does, to reach out to us. We are more than willing to help you craft and practice your testimony, to get you connected to the systems you need, whatever you need to speak up on behalf of wild native fish in your communities. And we encourage you to invite your friends. You know, the more folks that come out to speak on an issue, the more attention it gets in these forums. So with that, that's kind of the quick and dirty, but like I said, please reach out at any time if you want more information on developing this skill. And I think that kind of concludes what we've got going on.
Yeah, so I think we're going to open it up for questions now. If anyone has anything to say. It looks like Kirk, thank you, dropped those links to those different documents in the chat. So if you want to be able to check out those different documents we were referencing for the CMP, go ahead and check out those links. But yeah, please, if you have any questions, now's your time.
We also had a few come in early, so want to make sure we catch folks that are on the call right now, but we can also go through some of those.
I'm confused about the meeting. I thought that the meeting where they were going to make the decision on this is October 15th. That's the decision-making meeting, correct?
Hey, Mike, this is Kirk. We have a lot of commission meetings coming up. Obviously, there's one every month. This commission meeting coming up next Friday will be for the CMP. It's just an informational CMP review. On October 15th, they're going to be reviewing the Rogue and South Coast Multi-Species Conservation Management Plan, which is everything from the Elk River south to the California border. And that is where we're going to be talking about being proposed as wild steelhead harvest. That's, if you're interested in wild steelhead harvest down there and standing up against that, that would be the meeting to go to. What we discussed here is just some other adaptive management actions that we would like to see on the North Coast.
I see. Okay. I understand now.
No worries.
And Kirk, we might have another one of these lunch and learns specifically for the
Rogue. Yeah.
The Rogue South Coast plan.
Beginning of October, I'll be able to share kind of some of the talking points for the Rogue South Coast plan. That's a plan that hasn't been adopted yet. So they just crafted it over the past year and a half, and they're looking to get it adopted by the commission. That'll be presented in October and decided on in December. So there might be 2 meetings that we have to share our voice in, but we heard great voice shared with ODFW staff on that earlier this summer.
So what is the time and date of this next meeting? It's a week from.
It's a week from Friday.
A week from Friday.
So September 17th, the commissioners will be hearing from some ODFW staff about the CMP, and then they'll also, be taking a public testimony on it as well. And the commission meetings always start at 8 a.m. and usually like pretty much right on time. Fortunately, I think that there's a few items in the agenda before the CMP discussion, so it won't be an immediate thing, but you'll want to be there probably as close to 8 as possible if you want to testify, just to make sure.
Thank you.
And we can send out more information following this on that meeting and how to register and how to join that meeting. And then also we'll make sure to send out information on the subsequent Rogue South Coast stuff as we get a little closer to that in October.
Lots of stuff happening.
Yeah, it's a busy fall. One of the questions that we had come in previously is NFS is one of dozens of small NGOs all working to rally their members and followers to take action in accordance with their specific agendas. What is being done to build a coalition among all of these groups that can provide a more effective strategy for getting the attention of politicians and policymakers on these important matters?
I can take that one if that's good with you, Liz.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, great question. And I totally agree. So what we've been working on here on the Umpqua specifically is we've created the North Umpqua Coalition. We've got three local conservation groups working with Native Fish Society, as well as Conservation Angler, Trout Unlimited, all working together to bring attention to the summer steelhead run on the North Umpqua, and specifically some adjustments with some of the hatchery programs going on there in terms of the summer steelhead. So all of us have worked together. It's pretty neat to see, we have local voices as well as regional voices all coming together to make the right decision. The other one I would just give an example for is on the Rogue South Coast plan stuff. I know we're talking CMP here, but we have Trout Unlimited, Wild Salmon Center, and Native Fish Society all working together in order to get the best results for conservation. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm working on some issues with Wild Salmon Center, specifically looking at like the logging plans, the Oregon Department of Forestry plans for the North Coast that apply there. So we're definitely, I think that it is a really good question. We're definitely building some of those coalitions and trying to find ways to use our different strengths as effectively as possible.
So I think Liz in our presentation answered the question, can you identify some of the conservation actions that ODFW could be taking?
And I think that something else that's happening that's a really great thing is that fortunately in this last legislative session, the Oregon legislative session, ODFW got money to reinstate and fund their habitat division again. And so I'm really hopeful that there's going to be some additional changes there, and that they'll be effective. As I mentioned, a lot of issues in the North Coast have to do with habitat degradation. So having that ODFW habitat division will be really helpful. And, as much as you can actually like voice your opinion to support that division, to support funding for that division, that's more of an Oregon legislature thing. But if you can write your state representatives and say like, hey, thank you so much for this. I really appreciate this. This is a really important thing. That's really helpful too.
All right, well, we went a few minutes over, but we had a little bit of a technical difficulty at the beginning that's not unexpected. Are there any final questions? Liz will be sending out a follow-up email with links to those resources that we've shared. I believe even kind of a skeletal outline of our presentation today, as well as how you can register to speak at the commission meeting next week. Is there anything else I'm forgetting, Liz?
I don't think so. So yeah, just, if you're interested in testifying, let us know if you want some advice, if you want help putting your testimony together, if you want just to write your testimony out and submit it written and you want some help, feel free to contact any of us. All of us are more than happy to help with that. And if you want to know otherwise, like how to get involved with the watersheds that you love to fish, let us know there and we can help you find ways to plug in too.
I just threw all our emails in the chat box if anyone wants to copy and paste those for further reference. You can also find those on our website, but feel free to reach out with any questions you might have.
Well, thanks for joining us today, everyone. Thank you to Liz and Kirk, especially for putting together the real information that was shared today. And we look forward to seeing you all, be it at a commission meeting or a future lunch and learn.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.